Okay, so I think the time has come to do another update on the Subsonic 50 cal projects here. As we're working our way up to our goals, which are somewhere around 1,050 feet per second, dump big energy on those are not props, those are Norma cases, not Heart Blossom cases. None of that matters to you. But I've come in, weather's miserable out here, but I've been getting some more shooting in. I'm at, I don't know, over 500 rounds on these things. And I've, some of my stuff is still, I printed off a burn rate chart, and I've got marks on here. And this is something that really probably of no interest to any of y'all, but this is all but 3 of the powders I've tried so far. I'm honing down. I'm getting closer on this project, which is, as I've said, I'll just recap it, it's designed to be suppressed, but it won't be suppressed because I don't have a, that's going to be an unknown. But first I'm going to find out if the gun will shoot on its own. Then we'll worry about the suppressor thing. What's handy right now is that when I'm working right around the zone and it's not suppressed, it's kind of nice the fact that I can go pop, 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 crack, pop, crack. It would be better if my suppressor stuff gets through and does come in. It would be nice to be able to work with the suppressor on, because then it would be put, 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 crack, put, 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 crack. But I'm still finding out I can hear the difference. Which is the, let me get rid of some crap here. Let me go down too, because we don't really need my face gumming up the works, I don't think. So, we get down to where we're looking at some of the stuff that matters to us all. There have been changes. There have been a number of, well, here, let me put it another way. I showed you that just to illustrate that I've gone through a bunch of powders now. I've built up quite a few parameters now, and I'm getting the thing to shoot. Both of them, by the way. This is the original old Fart, and off to the side is the Fart Blossom, which I built on a better platform. I built it on a Savage AccuStock, and I had, up till now, I've weighted it, brought it up to where all of a sudden they're becoming very tractable. And one of the things that happened is, I'm running into trouble with ripping the scopes off. First of all, my March Genesis is an utter failure. It's a wimpy little, I tested it on 10 guns and it wasn't, so I sent it off, and I just got word today that it arrived in Japan. So, good. These guns are set up for the Genesis. I'm going to have to bring it up because I want to show you some of this stuff that I did. But one of the problems I'm running into is that because I don't have a Genesis now, I'm just setting a nice heavy scope, and one of the things you're going to see, I'm in the middle of all this, this white crap sticking out all over. I'm putting only heavy scopes on them because to make the system work, it needs something like a Genesis. I need to have hundreds of inches of adjustment to get out to 600 yards. So the only way the package really functions is with a Genesis. If the Genesis was bought, this is all designed with the Genesis in mind. But since it's gone for the foreseeable future, I just take a heavy scope and I put it on, and I've been shooting these rails off. I'm trying something here. I did some stuff earlier on this marine adhesive Fast Cure 5200. I really believe that this adheres metals together better than any epoxy that I've got, and I'm pretty careful with my epoxies. The bane of all epoxies is flex of any sort. You get some kind of a moment rippling through here, you get the heat and the cold, these epoxy joints just tend to come loose. So I wanted to show you this configuration to show you that this is heavy, but I'm still shooting with a really heavy scope. And for starters, I epoxied, but I also want to show you what else I've done here since we've talked in an attempt to get these things to flatten out. Because, as I started to intimate earlier, they're starting to shoot. I've got, oh man, I don't know how many powders here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15 or 16 powders I've tried, primer combinations. I'm getting some of them down under 25 feet per second. So at 100 yards, I've got my vertical. I know there's a certain amount of normal vertical. There's a certain amount of all kinds of different things, but I've gotten the vertical that's driven specifically by extreme spread down to where I can call it about 2 inches. And I don't have anything rock solid yet, but I've got I've got good hopes now that I'm going to get my ES down to around 10. And at that point, things are going to get really interesting. But in the meantime, number one, I'm shooting the freaking scopes right off the guns. So, by the way, I mentioned earlier that these are designed to be silenced. I wanted to tell a little story. Back in the day, one of the properties I lived on, the neighbors would complain when I shot at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why. I mean, they were hundreds of feet away. But long story short, I had some complaints, and I didn't shoot at 2 in the. I shoot at 2 in the morning on this place because I can. I don't need a silencer. But over there, I did something. I set up a suppressor. I set up a tube. Let's just stop with that. Picture a bunch of tires laying on 2x4s in a wood rack, and jammed full of stuff. Bad insulation and pig wire, or hardware cloth, or whatever. And you can make an external silencer 20 feet long. The problem is I tend to get down and shoot long strings. And one night, about 2 in the morning, I woke up in a cold sweat because I was enjoying myself down there shooting, in a dream, luckily. And banging and kind of feeling bummed because I couldn't watch the wind the way I wanted it to, shooting through this tube. But I would pick up my head now and again and check the wind, and it was doing. And I picked up my head and I checked the wind, and I got back down on the scope, and a little kid popped up. And I waked up. And that was the end of my silencer tube experiment. It didn't actually last very long because it was down low enough that a kid that was curious, which is what kids should be. Now, they shouldn't be on that range, and they shouldn't, but neighbor kids, whatever. The point is that I woke up with a kid popping up in my silencer, in my scope, and it made me righteously uncomfortable. So, suffice it to say that I'm shooting these without a suppressor, so the accuracy readings are going to be a little different than... But let's not worry about that. The tuning and the accuracy, that can all wait. Right now I'm proving concept. And I'm making good enough strides. I'm getting to a point where I think I'm going to make this thing happen. Now I'm running into other problems. Number one, the scope's shooting loose. This is the other gun. You can see the white stuff on here where I goobered this on. I basically just squirted some onto a card and then toot. But I wanted to show you what I've been doing. I'm starting to feel that this old gunky action is flexing too bad. And it doesn't have a good riding surface. Now I'm getting down. This thing's shooting good enough now that I'm starting to be affected by... I'm starting to believe that I'm shooting worse than the gun. That's a fun place to be, by the way. 99.9% of all the people, 99.999 ad infinitum of the people in the world will never have the pleasure of shooting a gun that actually shoots better than they do. Granted, the excuse gets called out all the time. Oh, I'm shooting, the gun's out shooting me. BS. 90, I mean, let's forget about all these numbers. Almost all of the time, you are capable of shooting better than the gun. Until you've seen some truly accurate guns. If you don't own a gun that will all day long, day after day, on call, hold my beer, shoot into a 1/4 minute, then you don't have an accurate gun. So these are getting down to where I'm having a little trouble separating the wheat from the chaff. So I decided to go after some of the problems, go after some of the stuff. As you know, I've added the big weighted assemblies on the barrels to bring the weight up, because I learned from my much brighter than myself children that as you bring the weight of the assembly up, the recoil velocity and the resultant felt recoil goes way down very quickly. So I'm playing with this one as movable. It's got a sliding sleeve and the whole thing is threaded from here on out. And it's covered by this sleeve. So I can torque this and lock it down. It is locked down. So the weight is taken care of up here in the front. And here in the back I've done some, and I haven't even cleaned this up yet, and I don't know if I will. These are prototypes, for crying out loud. I don't really care. Put a scope on there, you'll never see it. So I roughed this up. It's blown the epoxy out 3 or 4 times because this particular one's going to either get a big Schmidt and Bender or a big IOR Valdata, the biggest one they make. It weighs 3.4 pounds or something. I'm trying to mimic the Genesis. It doesn't have the offset of the Genesis, but still it shakes this apparatus around big time and it rips this thing right off. So what I'm trying now is this 5200. Goobered in here nicely. I degreased the Peabody out of this and I mech'd it and everything. And then I left that pin right there low so that you can see that it only comes, it's about an 1/8 inch below the surface. This one is up to flush, up to flush. Got 4 pins in this thing. These pins are remarkable. They're fitted pins, and they essentially eliminate this ripping off thing, plus the fact that this stuff's got some give. I'm pretty excited that I think this is going to stay on here forever. I think I'm going to have trouble getting it off, which is fine. In this case, with a Savage Inch 350 action and a small pick rail, I don't have to remove the pick rail to do only 150 pounds. And here's another thing. I'm not sure that this one needs 150 pounds. This is a 20 TPI. That exerts a lot more than a 16 TPI or even an 18 TPI. This 20 is such that when I was putting this on, I used a big pipe wrench and I figured it. I was going to go to 100. I stopped a little short of 150 pounds on this because I felt it was starting to mush the threads. 20 TPI, nicely lubed, exerts a lot more pressure, and they're smaller threads. So where I'm going up to is I've got a nice abutting shoulder here. I've got all the right things here to get this joint to lock up. And this one is set at 145. But it should have more compression stress on it, more stretch on it, than the equivalent in a 16 TPI at 150 foot-pounds. Easily. So I feel that this joint is stabilized. So I don't feel that there was any movement here. I was getting some movement out of this, but I wasted a lot of rounds. I wasted $500 worth of ammo on that stupid Genesis. So now I've got known scopes on here. I feel I've got these locked up so they're not moving anymore. I feel this is good. The weight is definitely locked down. This thing's down to mush fit. Now it's time to go after this old trashy stock. So I rough bedded it, and I left the magazine well. It's got traction all the way around it. This action fits in here so tightly. There's no reliefs on it at all. And it's bang, bang. And I was thinking to myself, is that second bang enough? This wimpy little action with a great big hole. Now, I could weld this up. I could do all kinds. I could fill this with epoxy. I could get it to lock all the way around. Maybe I could stiffen this area in here. But being a Savage, the tang is free floating. It's back here doing nothing. So I got 1 and 2. I decided, you know what? I don't like that. So I did this. This is factory, this is factory, this is not factory. I put a big recoil lug. I fitted it so tightly that you can't get it together without heating this. It's timed, it's perfect, and then I drilled a 1/4 28 hole in here. I don't know why I'm putting this in, but just, and it goes down pretty deep. And it's now a pull down screw, but I don't like the idea of screwing and pulling down into. I wanted to be able to put more tension on these and stiffen them up even more. This one's got a screw down. These two I decided I'm going to take one step further, and I inset them with a big enough hole that, I don't even know if I have a nut here, but a nut and washer assembly drops down inside the hole. There's a nut right there, and it fits in that hole, and I can get a small socket over it. So with a through socket, which I have, these two up here are now stacks of nuts, stacks of washers epoxied into place, and I screw studs in into the action, which only holds about 4 threads, so it could technically strip out, and into that recoil lug, which holds more threads. But now I can run a stud in there and I can put Mongo pressure on these without stripping anything out. The other thing is, I thought I was having I didn't like the riding surfaces generated by this. This stock is cut way back. So I took this hunka of aluminum and I made myself a fore-end. And I poured this, I epoxied it, I roughed it, I did everything, and I poured, as you can see in the shine, this is poured completely full of epoxy, and with no screws in it, I don't think you could rip it off. Even though this is a Tupperware stock, some gum metal, gum plastic, rubber, epoxy doesn't adhere very well. Like if I've got it on the stock, I can scratch it off with my thumbnail. Well, not all of it, I roughed this up pretty good. But I poured this full with a nice loose juicy epoxy matrix after sealing both ends. So this is on here pretty good. Like I could probably just go out, bolt the gun in and shoot it, and it would never tear off of there. But I always have the option of drilling and screwing into the sides. We'll see. This is something to play with, but it's acting both to stiffen this cheap Tupperware stock, but more to give it a good, solid riding surface. So now the shaking, these are a few things that I did. I've affixed the scopes permanently. I've built a riding surface. The gun goes together now. Probably, I doubt that I can get it together on camera because there's no relief fitments anywhere. Hey, there goes the recoil lug. It's going, it's going, it's going. I didn't even blow it out, so it might not be buried. But now you can see better what I've got going here in an attempt to, number one, make it hold together, number two, stiffen it all up. The only weak place now is right here in the pistol grip, and I'm not that concerned. It's still, factory heavy. But this right now is biggest bogus. I've got the rail pinned. That's huge. The fore end is glued. That's huge. And I've added the pull downs. I think that's huge. So I've got both of these. I've been spending a bunch of time now doing a bunch of work on these guns to make them more, doing accuracy things to them. The barrels are timed, but regardless, this is a cheap junk stock. I was always planning on doing something like this. Well, now I have. So now I'm excited because I'm going into my next round of shooting with some loads that are honed down to under 20 feet per second with 3 different powder primer combinations. And I think I've got both guns tightened up. Now the only downside is that the scopes that I'm going to have to use, this is a heavy scope though, it should still be efficacious. This is still it's a monster, and it's hanging, so it's still going to throw at this assembly plenty of stress and strain. Well, I was going to talk about some other things with scope mounting. I'm working on some sets of rings that I can use a 35 on a 34. This is a 35 millimeter. No, it's 40 something millimeter scope. It's a monster. But I'm not going to talk about that now. I've got another thing that I'm all excited about, so I want to share it with everybody about using I've got a lot of 34mm scopes, and I've got this situation where I think I can do a 35mm ring on the rear and a 34 on the front, lock the front one up rocky solid, and leave the back one inside of one of my rubber encasements, so that as the action and the scope are working and swelling in the sun and flexing, that it'll be fixed by the front scope ring and only centered by the back scope ring. So, I don't know. I guess that's all, guys. I mean, this is my whole fart file, and that's all I could think of. So I'm just going to put this stuff away. I just wanted to let you know that I think I like to make the challenge before I go out there and fall flat on my face, because that's a lot more fun than coming in after the fact and going, got her working. But now I've got, my loads are pretty well dialed in. These are little ones. These are the ones I'm shooting hundreds and hundreds of. This is the big one that goes in. That's how much bigger it looks. I'll try to superimpose it on there. It sits in there. Makes it into a... Anyway, this is the 1,000 and some grain. This is a little 650. And to be clear, I've got the 650s down to an acceptable extreme spread. I haven't honestly got these, because at the cost of these pigs, I'm a little cheap. So I do 20 of these and I do a group of those, or 2 groups of those. I got a lot of these other lathe turn solids that are really low BC, but I'm so excited about this 1,000 grain stuff since it came out. Resurrecting the Fart Project, it was a very cool time for Cutting Edge to come out with a bullet that I hope was showing real promise. That's all I've got to say. I'm getting the ES down on these little 650s and on the 750s, which are still reasonably cheap. By no means am I calling these Cutting Edge bullets overly expensive, because they're a very fair value. But I'm just saying, I haven't honestly got these under 25 feet per second yet. But I have a plan to. I have a way forward. So, we'll see what happens. Just keeping you up to speed. Enjoy the day.